for the Chodesh, the second day of the Chodesh, other base. We are up to the Gemara on Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, about 7 lines on the top. Boy Rava. So we're discussing the idea of a chutzner. Why does a courtyard work? Is it in a yad? Is it like a shliach? And we said that in some cases it's like a yad, for example, by a get, where a shliach will never work. And in some cases it's like a yad. In some cases like a shliach, where it's a positive thing, like you find a metzia, or if somebody gives you a gift. So we're up to the Gemara here. Boy Rava. Rava asks an interesting question. What happens if Zorak Aniki bepesach zeh, somebody threw a wallet or a purse going inside your house via one window, and then it flies out, and the yotze pesach, it flies right out the other window, the other door. It flies right out. Mahu. The question is, the owner of the house, will you koine this flying object while it traveled through your house? So the question is as follows: anything in your house belongs to you, but here it's in the airspace, and never was going to land because it's flying very quickly in one window out the other. Do we say the time that it's spent in your house as if it was lying in your house, or not? Or we don't say that. Papa the Rava. So Papa said to Rava, the other said of Ada Bamasa to Rava, the other said Avina said to Rava. Now Ravina discussing with Rava means that Ravina was far older than Rav Ashi. Because Rashi was born when the Rava passed away, at least according to Rashi's understanding. And so how in the world can the Ravina, who was Rav Ashi's friend, have a discussion? And obviously Ravina must have been quite old already, because Rava is asking a question and Rava didn't know the answer, and Ravina is answering it. So Lav Hainas, isn't this what our Mishnah says? If you saw somebody running after an object, when do we say that it runs across your field, that your field is kind on your behalf, that if you're able to catch up with it, if you're able to catch up with it and reach it? Let me ask the question, what about matana? That's an object that has no owner. What about a gift that somebody's actually giving it to you? Do you really have to catch up to it? Or the very fact that it ran across your field, you're already kinda, because somebody else gave it to you, and that person's kavana of giving it to you is sufficient. Hey, the kibul min Bava Bakana b'matana, that Bava Bakana accepted that by gift, and the aim again, you cannot reach it, you are kinda. So l'chai saying here, even though you cannot catch it because it's flying in one window or the other, it becomes yours. Amalei, he answered back, that's no analogy. You know why? Mizgalga kama, there was rolling on the ground. This animal, this deer, is running across this land. It's actually stepping on the ground, and therefore you're kinda if somebody else gave it to you. Shiny mizgalga kimurdami, but over here it never landed on the ground. It was in this air space. So what's the din then? Do we imagine the airspace as if it landed? Even though in Hilchos Shabbos we had a machlekes Rabbi Akiva and Chamim, whether we say klutik k'moshuncha, that's something that's in the air as if it's landed already. But we're not talking about Hilchos Shabbos. We're talking about regarding acquisitions. Do we treat it as if it's on the ground and live for the trainer or not? And the Gemara remains the question. And we have a fascinating argument here between Rashi and Tosfos. Rashi adds one word to this whole question. There's an object flying through your house, and the Gemara is comparing it to a gift. What this object itself is flying through your house, what is it? So Rashi adds the word that belonged to somebody, and he made it hefker. Somebody made it hefker, and it flew through your house. Tosfos says impossible to say that we're talking about a case that you made it hefker. And why is that? Because it's definitely talking about a case here that somebody gifted to you and it's flying through your house. Because if it's hefker, how does the Gemara then compare it to a matana? Matana, somebody's giving it to you. This is hefker. Nobody's giving it to you. Comes out from here, Rashi and Tosfos have a very fundamental argument. How do we understand hefker? And before I tell you what Rashi Tosfos says, let's go to the Gemara Nedarim. There in the Gemara Nedarim, we had an argument of Rabbi Yossi and Chachamim. Hefker, if you make something ownerless, do we say it still belongs to you until somebody else comes along and picks it up? Or do we say that as soon as you made hefker, it's no longer yours? And an argument of Rabbi Yossi and Chachamim. Well, if you learn that that hefker, as long as nobody took it, it's still mine, then when you make it hefker and it's traveling through the window, it's considered das acheres makne, because when someone takes it, it's as if I gave it to him, because it was mine until the very last second. So then the Gemara makes sense, that the Gemara compares hefker to matana. And in fact, that's the halacha, so therefore we can say that the Gemara follows. But is there a way of learning pshat in the Gemara, like the other opinion, that hefker, as soon as I made it hefker, it's no longer mine, and yet, according to Rashi, we add the word hefker because it's compared to matanis, like das acheres makna. And so he said, what are you talking about? How can it be das acheres makna? When you make the moment you have, it's no longer yours. So it doesn't belong to anybody. How are you giving it to somebody else? So it must be, according to Rashi and the Ramban and the Rashba, who add the word hefker, they learn that even if you make it hefker straight away, the question is, what does hefker mean? Does hefker mean that I'm walking away from it, I don't want it anymore? Or hefker means I'm taking it and I'm giving it to the whole world? Am I giving it away or am I walking away? Rashi and the Ramban and Raj and others clearly learn that when you make it hefker, you're giving it away to the whole world. So even though I gave it away straight away, and somebody else takes it till then, it's not mine anymore. But whenever that person takes it, as if it's I gave it to that person, because I gave it to the whole world. He's one of the members of the world. So the only thing, when he makes a kinyan, he's eliminating everybody else. So I gave it to him. That's das acheres makna. That's exactly what Rashi holds. And Taisus holds no. That hefker means you're walking away from it. If you're walking away from it, it doesn't... what do you call it? So how can he compare it to matanda das acheres? And therefore he said, we don't learn. It's not hefker here. We're talking about a guy who gifted it, but he threw it through your house, through the window, and just traveled and went out the other window. And even if you learn like Rashi and Ramban, that hefker means you're giving away to the whole world, hefker and yish are not really the same thing. Because by yish, most of the tzavs and sivas, most people learn yish, you're abandoning it, I'm walking away. And it's not like hefker that you're giving it up to the whole world. So yish and hefker are very, very different things. Okay. Mishnah. It says in Mishnah, if let's say your child finds an object or your daughter finds an object, or your slave or your maid, non-Jewish, if they find something, or your wife had a so they all belong to you. Your wife belongs to you because you made a special takana. You feed her, and certain things she has to give back to you. One of them is if she finds an object. Otherwise, there'll be ava, there'll be animosity, enmity between the two of them. And the same thing, your daughter. That you have, according to Rashi, the reason why your daughter, everything that she earns, talk about daughter, a minor, because kol shavar based on the urim lavia, everything that any improvement that she has goes to the father. That's what Rashi says. Other Mefarshim say, how can that be? Other Rishonim say it could be because we learned in Gemara that's talking about Nedarim. The father has the right to annul her Nedarim, but rather the reason is the same thing, because he has the right to marry her off to anybody he wants. So she has to curry his favor and be nice, and therefore give the mitzvah. And Eved, whatever belongs to Eved, belongs to the master. And the Benoi will see the Gemara soon. Says the Gemara, what about your children are adults? Because even with Jewish slaves, I mean, you don't really own them. Your wife, you divorce, which obviously it's hers. Why is the Mishnah say? We'll see later in the Gemara. Even though you didn't give her to yet, it belongs to them. Says the Gemara, I understand Bita, as we just explained. I understand the wife, but why your son? Okay, he's a minor, but why if he finds something, should it go to the father? We know that if a minor finds something, then either Darkei Shalom, we say, look, the child has no kinyan, but we don't want people to take advantage. So therefore, the Rabbanah said, let the child have it. And according to Rabbi Yossi, it's midrabbanan. It's a strong din. You can even take them to din Torah for taking away from him, because midrabbanan they have kinyan. But ma'atayla, definitely a child cannot have a kinyan. So why is it we say if a child finds something, it goes immediately to the father? He says in Shmuel, you know why? As soon as he finds it, the first thing a child thinks is give it to his father. He's so proud that he found something for his father. He doesn't lay it in his hand at all. He doesn't want, as if he picked it up for his father, because the son really is not kind to himself at all. Whatever he has goes to his father. And even those who hold that Magbi and Metzila Chaver, they like kind of Chaver, and one of them is Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman was a student of Shmuel, so he's not arguing with his Rebbe, because even Rav Nachman would agree when it comes to a minor, a child, this is like really everything he does is just for just the father, like an extension of the father, and so on. The memory, it seems the Slava Shmuel cotton less lays chil and nasher as a child's not kind of hatoila, because if a child will kind of himself, we can't automatically come along and say it belongs to the father. But we're saying because the only child is very tenuous ownership, so therefore in this case we know that the nature of a child is to run to his father, therefore it's the father's. So you want to have a problem with that, because I think Shmuel holds that a child is kind of hatoila for himself. And therefore, why should we automatically say it goes to the father? The child, let's say, protests, I want it. Where do we see that mahatoida, whatever child owns, goes to the father? As follows, regarding the din. If somebody hires a worker, if somebody hires a worker, and then let's say there's lekka things fall down that you're not going to pick up again, and you have to leave the poor, then the son can come along and pick it up. The son has every right to pick it up. However, if the father is a sharecropper, so he owns part of the land, then the din is that even though you're poor, you're not allowed to take the lekka you pay for yourself from your own field, and your son is like you, and therefore you cannot have your son take it after you because you're the owner of the field. And Rabbi Yossi says, even if you're the owner of the field, your son can take, because your son is totally independent. Your son is totally independent. Whatever he takes is for himself. In other words, Rabbi Yossi holds that mahatoida belongs to the child. And the Easter Achar and his wife can also because she's independent. Shmuel, halach Rabbi Yosi. And Shmuel says halach Rabbi Yosi. So it sounds like a what? The Shmuel paskins that a child is independent from his father. So how can he explain our Mishnah that a child, is not independent? It's like the father picked it up. Yeah, maybe a child is independent. It doesn't matter that the father is a sharecropper, the child is collecting for himself. And then later he gives it to his father, and then he forgives his father. It's the kid who's giving to his father. It's not part of the land. If you tell me a child does not have any independent abilities, so when he's collecting, it's collecting for his father. But how can he? If you tell me the son is a continuation of the father, like Shmuel said in the beginning, if he runs to his father, how can the son collect? The father owns part of the field. Why can they collect? The answer is more the simple answer. Shmuel Taima de Tana de Don Ka'omar. Shmuel rules like Rabbi Yosi, but he's just explaining our Mishnah. He learns that our Mishnah does not follow Rabbi Yosi, that our Mishnah says whatever the child has goes to the father, does not follow Rabbi Yosi, because Rabbi Yosi holds a child independent. And he's just, so therefore, obviously, our Mishnah follows the Rabbanan, and he's explaining the view of the Rabbanan. He doesn't hold like our Mishnah, he rules like Rabbi Yosi. Says the Gemara before we go further. So your assumption is the one who asked the question of Shmuel that Rabbi Yosi holds that is from the Torah, that a child. But now we learned that the Rabbanan said, if a child picks something up, we don't want you to take from him. It's like Zayla Midrabbanan, because Dr. Shalom, we need the people to live civilly together. And the Rebbe says it's worse. Gezel Gomer Midrabbanan. So what's the difference between Rabbi Yosi and Chacham? They both say that it's only the Rabbanan. If you do steal from a child, according to Rabbanan, you shouldn't have done it. It's unethical, immoral, but we're not going to do anything about it. According to Rabbi Yosi, you can go to court. The child can take them to court and send them to court and collect back his money. But bottom line, everyone holds only midrabanan. So why do we say before the matzah? Elam Rabaya. The pshat is as follows. Why? So why by paya do we say according to Rabbi Yosi that a child? What's the logic? Rabbi Yosi holds that by paya a child can, even though the father is a sharecropper, the child can collect the lekach pay. Why? The chayd is only midrabanan that the child has ownership. Mahatayda, the child has no ownership. Whatever he picked up belongs to the father. No, the father's owner of the field. How can he have his child collecting lekach chichapeya? Asua, we treat it kimisha hochubana mushas. But once the children of this person goes in there, all the other poor people give up hope, abandon hope of ever getting it back. So they're miyash. So therefore, there's no longer a prohibition of taking the lekach chichapeya because it belongs to other poor people. There are no other poor people. As soon as they see these kids roaming around, they give up hope. They abandon hope of collecting from it. It's like the blind people, the ones who walk with these walking sticks and they touch everything, so they pick up the last remnants of any payer. They will give up hope. They think this kid probably picked everything up. It doesn't make sense. Are we going to allow for, let's say, one poor person to go into the field, put a lion in front, or a vicious dog, and therefore all the poor people give up hope and he'll collect all the pay? Is that fair? You bring your children in, and as a result of that, all the poor people walk away. That's not fair. You cause them to walk away. Is it permitted for a person to lie down a line in his field so poor people sit and run away, flee? Elamar Rava says, Asu. You know what we did? You know why the child, even though it's only kind of rabbanon, we say he can take the payer? We make she'enu zeiche kezeiche. We said that even though the child Taka Mahatera is not Zeicha, with the Rabbanan we're going to make as if the child is Zeicha Mahatera independent from his father. Now, Mahatera, you shouldn't be able to collect because it belongs to the owner. When the Rabbanan said we make it, so we answer the pshat is like that the Rabbanan, there's a concept called Hefke Bezin Hefke. The Rabbanan have the right to come in and say that the pay belongs to nobody, and therefore the child can come and take it. And why would the Chacham do that? Why would the Chacham allow this person's children? Because all the other poor people are very happy with this law, because then in their own situation, they're very happy to have the kids helping them collect as much lekach chichapeya. So they don't mind if this poor person here brought his children in, because they're going to use the same benefits when it benefits them. My time, the poor people themselves, they're very happy to do when they collect for themselves, that their children can come and support them. And this pligid of Chibarabba, this argues This what Shmuel learned Shatna Mishnah, that the reason why it belongs to the father is because the child, whatever he has, goes straight to the father and is totally dependent on the father. Argue the Chibar Abba, because he learns what we're talking about here. Even a child is an adult. Chibar Abba says when it says child, when it says adult, it doesn't mean on your passport. It means dependent or independent. If you're dependent, you can be 19 years old, so you're dependent on your father. Everything you get, every mitzvah goes to your father. Even though everyone agrees once you're 19 years old, Mahatera, you're kind of, yet it goes to your father. You know why? For a different reason altogether. Because of Ava. We don't want to drive a wedge between the son and the father. The father's nice enough to give him a room and board for nothing. Then if the son finds something, the Havda in the various world, a lot of times the parents start charging their children rent. Once they're a certain age, if they want to continue living at home, pay rent and pay room and board. So, but we're saying that, you don't do that, but at least be nice. And if you have some fringe benefit that you didn't work for, share it, give it to your father. So it's because of Ava, nothing to do with halacha that automatically goes to your father. And therefore, we're talking about a child over 13, so there's nothing to do about a minor. And what does it mean, a katan? A katan means dependent. And what does it mean, a gadol? Independent. Even if you're a child 7 years old, if you're independent, you don't have to give it to your father. Says this argument, it doesn't mean by age, like katan mamish. El gadol, you could be older, but if you're dependent, then you considered a cotton, and the Rabbana stepped in and said, whatever you find, give it to your parents. Cotton, but if you're a child and you're not dependent, you're independent, then even though you might be a minor, zeo gadol, that's treated as a gadol. If this applies to everywhere in Shas where it says cotton gadol, when it comes to kinyanim, or only in these cases like this, by Metzia. If the Jewish Eved found something, it belongs to themselves. Now, we just learned before in the Gemara that if you hire a worker and you give him a specific, we learned yesterday, if you give him a specific job, then outside of that, he can keep. But if you give him a general job, you're working for me, then even finds a mitzvah, he has to go to the boss, to the employer. So l'chayda by an Eved, the Eved doesn't have a specific job, he's an Eved. His job is to do everything. So how come the mitzvah they can keep l'chayda to go to the boss, to the master? Let him be no different than a worker. But time we learn mitzvah, a worker can keep an object that he finds for himself. If you gave him specific jobs, weed for me today, adori and plow for me today. If you told him, I say if you told him go ahead and do work, perform any work for me today, it ends up with the master. I'm going to play Bava over here. We're talking about an Eved with a specific job, and that's why if you find something, he can keep it. But the only thing is, we deduct the time that he used up. What means specific job? For example, an Eved that goes ahead to polish the diamonds, to shape diamonds, and so on, because that's a very highly skilled profession, and you hire the person to do it full time. He's an Eved for that. And therefore, the Metzia can belong to the Eved. You just deduct the time. The master would never want him to go and look for objects because the work that he does is invaluable. Rava says, you know what we're talking about here? Why he doesn't go to master? While he's doing the work, whatever the work is that his master specified he should do, or he told him to do right this moment, without taking up any time, he found something. He's supposed to plow the field, and he milled plowing. He picked up this thing. It took him no time. He put it in his pocket. So therefore, it does not go to the master. And our Papa says, we're talking about a case where his job was to find a lost object, and therefore it goes to the master. Now, what kind of job is that? Talking about the Akfa there's a flood, the river breached the banks, and then the river swept away things, and then brought many things back. And after the water recedes, you find all of this fish that's sitting there on the shore, and therefore that's his job. And so each of the can while he's there, he finds other things as well. His job was to locate Metzias and therefore goes to the master. Then it says, Shivcha, hey, Shivcha, this girl, hey, Shidami, what are we talking about? What are we talking about in this case of here? What about a Jewish Shivcha? We know that a Jewish maid cannot be a maid after 12 years old. So, hi, Shidami, either I say that reached puberty, then my Bergabe, why is she a Shivcha still? The lawyer, she didn't reach puberty, then she still has a father. And we know that benefits outside of her work to the master doesn't go to herself, everything goes to her father. Isha of Davu have it goes to the father. I like Rashi says Kol Shavach Nurim Beis Avia, or because of Ava. So she doesn't get to keep it. Be the lesser love, and if she doesn't have a father, then tape Misra, then she should have gone free anyway. Because there's an opinion that says that if she was 9 years old and the father died, she goes free, even though she still has 3 more years to run. Why? That Amivriya is set free when the father dies. Mishusa Adam from her master Kavuchemer. And it makes a kalochem if she leaves the master when the master dies. Surely she leaves the master when her father dies. Says, that's not a question. The lav itoisiv reish lakish. Didn't we reject reish lakish? So therefore, it's not a question. And you want to know, so why is the object still belonging to her? Because maybe she has no father. Says what we mean to ask is, so when we have all these questions to the shlokish, why don't we ask from here as well? Name a tutor. Here we have a question to shlokish as well. How can you explain that it belongs to the girl? If she had a father, it goes to the father. If she has a father, she should have been free. You can answer even when she has a father. So if she has a father, why does she keep it? It should go to her father. The Gemara says the Mishnah is not out to tell you if she keeps it or ends up with the father. What the Mishnah is out to tell you is, but it does not go to the master. The main focus is whether it goes to the master or not. Well, my had doesn't go to the master. That's all. Mitzias Ishta, his wife, if he divorced her, even though he didn't get Riksubah, he doesn't get to keep it. So, the whole reason why he gets to keep mitzvah is because he provides for her, so therefore he's entitled to mitzvah. There shouldn't be any enmity. But there is so much enmity anyway. He's lost her, so why should she have to give the mitzvahs that she finds to her husband? My skin has been talking about a suffix. He threw a get at her. We're not sure it was closer to her, closer to him. She's a suffix divorce, and the law is that he still has to feed her. So we would have thought, since he still has to provide for her, maybe she should still continue with that other law that she should reciprocate and give it back to mitzvahs. And the chiddush is, in this case, there's no point. The whole point is to keep shalom bayis. There's no shalom bayis anyway. The husband has to continue to support her. What's the whole reason why we say that her mitzvahs belong to her husband and there shouldn't be any animosity? There's so much animosity here, it makes no difference. So she can retain her mitzvahs. Next Mishnah. Talking about finding things. Now we're talking about finding a loan contract. Now, a loan contract, we already had a discussion in the beginning of Zion. In a loan contract, there's a big difference who you give it back to. With Avzaim, we talked about they were both holding on to it, the lender and the borrower. The question is, what do we do with this loan contract? Here we're talking about you found a loan contract, nobody's holding on to it. You found the contract. Now, a loan contract entitles the lender to go to the borrower and obviously collect his money, the B'nai Chayrin, but the borrower has no assets, entitles you to go to the Mishabadim, to any properties that were sold after the date recorded on that document. You can collect and say, look, I had a lien on it and you have no right to buy it, and it's your problem. You go turn back to the seller and you get yourself reimbursed. So now, there's a machlekes whether you have to actually write in the star that all the assets are encumbered. According to the Chachamim, achrayis toya sefer. You don't have to write that's encumbered because every star automatically means that all the properties are encumbered. But the Rameir holds that achrayis is lav toya sefer. You have to write down there that there's a lien on the property. Otherwise, the lender has no right to collect from any of the properties. So now what happens as follows. You found this loan document. If there were assets, don't return it. Why? The Bezdin will use it to collect from the purchasers, and we don't know. Maybe it was paid up. Maybe there's three possibilities here. One possibility, maybe it's a fraudulent document. The other one is there's a possibility cost of little very low. Well, you wrote the document, but it never happened, never transpired. You prepared it, and everything else in the last minute, the borrower or the lender changed their mind. And the third possibility is that it was a proper document, but the borrower actually paid it up, and he's the one who dropped it. Three possibilities that can go wrong. So therefore, don't give it back. If you give it back, Bezin will probably use the document, and if the Malda goes into Bezin, they'll execute the document and collect. Therefore, don't give it back to them. Big machlek is and when we say don't give it back to them, what happens if you did? Can they use it to collect or not? Big machlek is show you. What happens? With no assets written there, then yachzeh. Then you can go ahead and give it back. Bezin will not go and collect from the borrowers. Remember, a mayor holds if you don't write down assets, you don't collect from assets from any of the borrowers. Now the question obviously is going to be, but you can use it to collect from the borrower directly. And what happens if it's a fraudulent star? What happens if it was written never to be used? Or what happens if it was paid up? Why are you giving it back to the lender? We'll discuss. The Chachamim say, never give back. Because we can use it to collect directly from the borrower. It's not fair. What's our mayor's logic? Says the Gemara, let's understand what's going on here. What does the borrower claim? The borrower says, I am that it's a valid star. In other words, he's saying it's a valid star and I didn't pay it back yet. So even if there's a lien on encumbered properties, why shouldn't you give it back? The borrower says I owe the money. The lender says he still owes me the money. Why shouldn't you give it back? He's admitting he's a good star. Later on, if you plot for now, if you give him, we're going to learn that there's a possibility that there's a deal going on here between the lender and the borrower, communia, that they both say they made up a story to in order to get this property back, and therefore, and it's not even a true thing. We're choishes. But right now, the Gemara assumes that they're honest people, and if they both admit that this is the claimer and the plaintiff and the defendant, they both say it's a good start, we should go back. So what's the mission talking about? No, boss. The borrower obviously is denying it. The borrower says there's no such thing. So even if there's no encumbrance on the property, so forget the lekuchas, the buyer, but the buyer herself. Why should the borrower have to pay a second time? You don't collect the body. At least collect. You collect for the borrower. It's not fair. He's denying it. He's denying it. And if you remember, we said, well, there was an opinion we said last time, or a few days ago, that we don't believe the borrower because we think that if you actually paid it back, you would have ripped it up in a minute. You don't hold it on to it. But here, the borrower might have made another claim. The borrower might have said, not that I paid it back. The borrower might have said, it's a fraud in the star. Or the borrower might have said that we wrote it, but it never transpired that you lent me the money because I didn't need it anymore. So those two claims, not that he paid it back, those two claims, why then giving it back to the lender? The borrower is denying it. Talking about a case where he actually made it a valid start. So what's the problem then? So why don't you just give it back to the lender? We're worried that possibility number two, possibility number four, maybe they wrote the star in Nisan, but they didn't actually execute it till 6 months later. But the date showing up at Nisan, so if anybody who bought a property between Nisan and Tishrei will lose that property to this lender, when by law he shouldn't have lost the property to the lender because the loan didn't actually take place till Tishrei. The problem is the date shows Nisan, and that's what we are worried about. So it's not fair for the buyers. Shema costs a little bit Nisan. You wrote to borrow Nisan. Didn't lend it until Tishrei. You come ahead and you'll take the lekuchas right, not rightfully. So says the Gemara. Whole stars go on any star that come before us. Why aren't we worried? Why? So every star that come before us. Why aren't we worried? Now what? Any star? How do we know that it's a valid star? Maybe the date and the date of the loan and the date written on the star are not the same. So how can we ever collect from lekuchas? Says the Gemara, co-study loydei. Stam in the vote. Why would we be suspicious? Generally, you assume everything was done correctly. Well, here our suspicion has been aroused because we found it on the floor. The moment you find it on the floor, you think to yourself, they weren't so careful with it. If they weren't so careful with it, maybe because there's something wrong with the star. What could be possibly wrong with the star? They're both agreeing that it's a valid star. Maybe the dates, and therefore they didn't treat it properly. Then once it falls down, it arouses our suspicion. Otherwise, we see a contract, we have no suspicions. Co-study loydei. Every star there's no weakness in it. Hani day here we have grounds for suspicion. That's why in this case over here we don't give it back, even though they're both made. So what are we worried about? Because we're worried about the dates. So directly from the Bnei Chayrin, we don't care if you go to the borrower and collect because he owes you the money. But we're trying to protect the purchases because we're worried that the dates don't match up with the time of the loan. So now we learned you're permitted to write a star for a borrower, even though the lender's not there. Now, if the lender's not there, it means the loan didn't take place. Now, you just told me that you're not allowed to write a star on one day and then have the loan another day because it's not fair on the buyers. So how come the chatchila we can say to a sofer, you can write the star on behalf of the borrower, even though the lender's not there, he might not come to town for another 3 months, which means the loan won't take place for another 3 months, and yet we allow this person to write a star document and today's date. How can we do that? Why be worried? If the lender's not here, how do we know the lender's going to lend the money this afternoon? Maybe he's not going to lend for months. How can Chazal do that? if there's such a thing that it's wrong. How can Chazal do that? Rabbi Yisrael says, you know what we're talking about here? When do we allow the loiver to write a star, even though the lender's not there? That in the star he adds, I am committing all my assets today. I am putting a lien on my assets today. I'm acknowledging. I don't care. It's not the loan that is going to place the lien on the properties. Then you're right. It's a problem. How do I know when the loan will take place? How can you write such a star if the lender is not standing here? We're talking about over here is that the borrower says, I am committing all my assets to this loan as of today. So therefore, the star is legal, it's binding, and the purchasers can go to a register and find these stars and protect themselves. The Hashiba Nafshe, he committed himself as of today onwards. So You're telling me that generally speaking, we never write a star unless that only at the time of the loan. The only time we write a star earlier is if you add the words that I am committing my all my assets as of today. So l'chayda yihachi masnis in diktani al mishnah is al mishnah is not talking about star, talking about normal star. Im yesh ben achrayis nechasim lo yachzir. You said al mishnah says if you found this document and there's a lien on property, don't give it back. And we said kishachayiv moida, don't give it back because even though they admit it, because we're worried that the dates are wrong. But if it never happens, now, what are you worried about? You said the problem is we're worried. We are worried that maybe the date does not match up with actual loan, and therefore we're harming the lekuchas. But for us in lekuchas like you did, but what are you worried about? Let's see. Let's look at the document. If it says clearly I'm committing my properties as of today's date, even though the loan took place much later, then what's the problem? Then by law, you're allowed to collect from the kuchas. He committed himself. And and if it's talking about an ordinary document without adding the words, I am committing my properties, then since nobody writes a star with an earlier date, what are you worried about? Give it back to the lender. The Amma, you said you said that no cipher would write a star if the lender is not standing right here before us. Ravasi says, you're right. Generally speaking, you're right. You're right. A star which is not hakno, which you're not committing yourself. When the malva is not standing there, like kasvin, we don't write. But remember, in our Mishnah, we're talking about a case where you found it on the street. The moment you find a star on the street, that arouses our suspicions that something might be wrong with this document. That's why we are treating it suspiciously, even though in general circumstances we would not. Masnis and Kim off once it fell down, it weakened the whole position of the star. We are worried about something which probably never happens. Because maybe it just so happened that the date does not marry up with the time of the loan, and even though he didn't commit his properties to it. Abaya says, Eidaf b'chasuma zochle. Abaya says that Eidaf b'chasuma zochle, which means Abai said the moment the Adam sign on the star, that commits the properties to this loan. Even though the loan might have taken place 3 months later, the fact that the Adam signed, then they commit, that puts the lien on the properties. Therefore, again, legally, and that's what we're worried about. Again, we're worried in our mission that you wrote one date and then later on another date. So he's saying legally that it's already from the date on the star, all the properties are already committed. So Abai is addressing if you're allowed to write a star without the malva being there. So Abai is telling us regarding that, even though it's not a star hakna. Before we said the only time you're allowed to write a star without the lender there on behalf of the borrower is if you wrote you're committing your properties. Abai said it's not necessary, because as soon as the Adam sign legally, you can collect from that date, even though the loan itself didn't take place to many years later. So that's how he explains the din of kaisvan leiva, even though the malva is not there with you, and that's what Abaye is talking about. And then we'll see later how Abaye relates to our Mishnah, and we'll stop over here. On Tuesday we're going to have the times are starting to get